In this video, we will try to see the development regarding civil disobedience movement, right. So, this is also one very important Gandhian movement, right. So, we will discuss civil disobedience, right, movement. Right. Now, try to understand some important right, confusion regarding civil disobedience movement. We generally prepare civil disobedience movement as one movement, but in some of your books you can see that there was civil disobedience movement 1, then there was civil disobedience movement 2. So, there are 2 civil disobedience movement. Why we are right considering it as a 2 civil disobedience movement? Because right, it is said that it is started in 1930, but right, you will see in 1931 there was withdrawal, right, it was withdrawal, Gandhi-Irwin Pact, right, temporary withdrawal, you can say this, and then it was relaunched again in 1932 and it continued till 1934. So, some historian they say that right, there is one phase and then there is second phase of, you can say, right, civil disobedience movement, phase 1 and phase 2. Is it okay? But remember that right, most of the historians they agree that it was just a temporary withdrawal and the movement right continued right just when Gandhiji announced that he is coming back, right. So, phase 1 and phase 2 very difficult to separate. So, there was a struggle, there was truce and there was a struggle, truce, struggle, fine. So, civil disobedience movement in general when you prepare as a one movement, and civil disobedient movement was very effective in this phase 1, but it was not effective in phase 2. Government repression was more and therefore official withdrawal. But after 1932 only you will see right that it was not at all effective. So, this phase of this civil disobedience movement was more effective. Is it fine? Now, see, try to understand the background of this civil disobedience movement. So, when you prepare civil disobedience movement, I told you this period is 1930, you can say 34. So, why this civil disobedience movement? And civil disobedience movement started with Dandi March. Now, you know this Dandi March, right. So, what is the background of this civil disobedience movement? Background you can understand from Simon Commission, right. So, Simon Commission agitation failure. So, Simon Commission failed, right, and after that you will see that there was Purna Swaraj resolution, Purna Swaraj resolution, and the result of this Purna Swaraj resolution was beginning of the mass movement called civil disobedience movement, fine. So, how civil disobedience movement? Simon Commission, its failure, right. Then you can say there was a proposal to frame right our own constitution, right. If you remember Nehru report, and even Nehru report could not satisfy different section, right? Even the young nationalists not satisfied with the Nehru report, and result of this was, right, Purna Swaraj resolution, and the result of Purna Swaraj resolution was civil disobedience movement. And what we have to remember, that after Purna Swaraj resolution, when Gandhiji was given this command, he demanded something, what is called 11-point demand. And when there was a refusal of this 11-point demand, civil disobedience movement was launched. Fine, I hope you are getting it. So, when you are discussing civil disobedience movement, they can ask you the background of civil disobedience movement. They can ask you the causes of civil disobedience movement. What would be the cause? How you will write the cause of civil disobedience movement? Why civil disobedience movement? Number 1 point, failure of, right, failure of Simon Commission. Why civil disobedience movement? Failure of Simon Commission. Number 2 point, right, Purna Swaraj resolution. Purna Swaraj resolution, right? After Purna Swaraj resolution, which was passed in Lahore, you just cannot, you can say, ignore, right, this demand, you have to fight for it. So, there was a mass movement. Then third, right, refusal of his 11-point demand. Refusal of his 11-point demand, Gandhi's demand of Gandhi. So, before starting this movement, he demanded, right, 11-point demand. Like what all points he mentioned in this 11-point demand? For example, right, number 1, some points mentioned in this demand was, number 1, he demanded 50% reduction in land revenue, 50% reduction in land revenue. Then he demanded abolition of salt tax, government's monopoly over salt. Number 2, right. Then you can remember third, reservation of coastal shipping for Indians. Right. Then number 4, lowering of that exchange ratio, rupee sterling exchange ratio, lowering of this exchange ratio. Then number 5, protection of indigenous textile industry, Then next demand, 50% cut in military expenditure, Then next demand, 50% reduction in expenditure on civil administration, 50% reduction on civil administration. Then next demand, total prohibition of intoxicants, Then release of all political prisoner, underline political prisoner. Bhagat Singh was not considered as political prisoner, right. So, release of all political prisoner, this was also one demand. Then changes in the Central Intelligence Department, and one more demand was changes in the Arms Act, Fine. So, why civil disobedience movement? Simon Commission failed, frustration, radicalization because of Purna Swaraj resolution, Gandhiji taking leadership, demanding 11 points. All these 11 points, they are related to peasant, middle class, different sections, some of general interest. So he presented. He just wanted to see the mood. And after this demand, there was no response. There was no response. He waited for around 40 days, more than that. But there was no response. And when there was no response, right, he had to launch movement, right, by, you can say, launching Dandi or introducing or, right, starting Dandi March, fine. Then you can also add one more point, why this civil disobedience movement, fourth point we can add, that there was, right, economic problem, there was widespread unemployment, because of economic depression in 1929, and the deteriorating condition of economy, infused anger among the youth, Indian youth. Is it fine? I hope you all can remember this very simple formula. Why civil disobedience movement? 4 ideas at least. What all? Why civil disobedience movement? Number 1, Simon Commission failed, frustration. Number 2, Purna Swaraj resolution in Lahore, radicalization. Number 3, Gandhiji demanding 11, you can say 11 demands of Gandhi, 11-point demand. No response. See the arrogance. And number 4, economic depression, unemployment, frustration, anger among youth. And they started joining Gandhiji in Dandi March and then in different phases of civil disobedience movement. Simple. I hope it is okay. Now, how the progress of this movement, right? How the progress of this civil disobedience movement, how it progressed. We can add that in phase 1, in the coastal areas, right, salt law breaking of salt law started. Right? So, breaking of salt law started, right? And you will see in different area, different examples of breaking salt law. In different coastal areas, different examples you have. Fine. So, breaking of salt law began in the coastal areas. Then, forest law were defied in the forest area, even the modern day Uttarakhand. Forest laws were defied. Then, there was refusal of paying Chaukidari tax in Bihar. Then, Chaukidari tax, and then there was picketing of liquor shops, where even women participated, and there was burning of foreign cloth. Fine. So, progress, but in 1931, phase 2 started, because Gandhi-Irwin Pact, and after that some decline of enthusiasm because of the repression. phase 2 after Gandhi-Irwin Pact 1931, and because of those failure of the pact, British government started suppressing the movement. You will see suppression, you will see reign of terror. British government started suppressing the movement, right? They started arresting all those nationalist leaders. They started gagging press, banning press. Indian National Congress was declared illegal. And finally, there was withdrawal of movement. There was withdrawal of movement. So, generally they say that there are two phases of this civil disobedience movement, phase 1 and phase 2, phase 2. Here you will see very effective, but here you will see decline of enthusiasm, probably because of government repression, right? Fine. Now, there is one more question, right? They can ask you, right? Question can be a regional variation of this movement, regional variation of this civil disobedience movement, regional variation. In different area, you will see the impact of this civil disobedience movement. For example, right, there was Dharsana Satyagrah. Dharsana is a place, Dharsana Satyagrah. Dharsana Satyagrah, led by Sarojini Naidu, led by Sarojini Naidu, led by Sarojini Naidu. Then in Tamil Nadu, there was a march by C. Rajgopalachari. Tamil Nadu, there was a march under C. Rajgopalachari. Then in the Malabar area, right, in the Malabar coast, Kerala, right, there was a movement under K. Kelappan. K. Kelappan. K. Kelappan. Then in Karnataka, right, there was a Sanikatta, salt satyagrah. So different area, different satyagrah, right. Then in Odisha, Gopal Bandhu Chaudhary launched a satyagrah. Gopal Bandhu Chaudhary launched a satyagrah. Then in Assam, tribals, they started revoking the forest laws. Tribal started revoking the forest laws. Then in northwest frontier area, there was, right, in northwest frontier area, there was what is called Khudai Khidmatgar movement, northwest frontier province. There was Khudai Khidmatgar movement under Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who is also called Frontier Gandhi, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Fine. So there you will see that in the civil disobedience movement, different reason, different character, right. Finally, what is the significance of this civil disobedience movement? Significance of the civil disobedience movement. Significance, you will see that large scale participation of women. So we have a separate video on that, role of women, right, you will see that, right. So role of women, and this civil disobedience movement is known for the large scale participation of women, right. Then you will see tribals also joined national movement on large scale in this civil disobedience movement. tribals, particularly northeast, right, northwest, Karnataka, Uttarakhand forest areas, tribals. Then you will see peasant farmers also organize themselves, right, organize themselves, and they also participated in the civil disobedience movement. Then you will see soldiers, sepoys, they also joined national movement, particularly Garhwali soldiers, right. So this movement, you will see new classes, you will see new generation of political activists, right. So this movement is known for broadening the base of our national movement, and this movement gave rise to, you can say, new kind of consciousness among different class, right, in new generation. So this civil disobedience movement is very, very important for our national movement.